forward to seeing more of you. So thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, we're going to go to DeepTech. And DeepTech is always exciting for us because that's when we also always get our technical issues during our events. I've got obviously Subramanian here, and but we're going to try to keep everything solid. So, but DeepTech is fascinating because anybody who's on top of venture capital is being flooded with money. People are looking at being able to invest in things like space, material science, all kinds of other things, robotics, AI, and anybody who's in this space knows that right now we're going through massive changes. It's just going to continue, especially for some of the ambitions of people who have commercial interests, let's say in the space world, et cetera. So I've got Avi is going to be leading the discussion. I've got Jeremy, I think he's online, and I've got Bryan and Saul. Oh, here, Jeremy's here. And I've got Saul online, I think. No, I've got Saul here too. Where's Bryan? Well, I'll get Bryan online probably. So thanks so much, guys. We're going to get started. Take over.
Hello, good afternoon. So hopefully this will be the best part of the session, fingers crossed. My name is Subramanian. I'm a partner at BlackPine, which is a single family office in Hong Kong. We are early stage investors, primarily direct investors in crypto, Web3, and AI/ML. I'm pleased to host a panel with DeepTech, encompassing AI, big data, robotics, space, etc. The panelists are Jeremy Baksht, who's a good long-term friend of mine, VP at DataFrame Ventures, to my right. To my left is Saul Richter, who is a managing partner and founder of Rittenhouse Ventures, and I think on the phone is Bryan Feinberg, who is founder of Zephyr Technology Ventures. As we get started, let's keep it very interactive. I have some questions I've written down, but please let's keep it interactive between the audience and us, so you don't need to be too regimented in terms of the order. But why don't we start and have each of the participants give a bit of background on themselves as well as their firm. And also, if we can define what DeepTech, how do you define DeepTech or what DeepTech means to you? Jeremy, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Avi. So my background, I was an industrial tech banker at JP Morgan and Citigroup for about a decade. And then post that, I was in several fintech ventures, one of which Avi was an advisor to about 9 years ago. We were backed by the New York Stock Exchange. It was called the ACE Portal. We actually were a family office asset private placement marketplace, which now doesn't sound that novel, but about a decade ago it was. So through that journey, I've been an investor in about 50 companies. I started a small firm called DataFrame Ventures. We invest in a lot of different data-oriented SaaS companies this past year. And then I'm pleased to announce in September, I joined a fund called Azafran Fund. Fund 2 is a 200 million target. First close is next month. And what Azafran does is we're a seed stage venture fund in what we call applied deep tech, and I'll explain what the applied part is. We're in the applied deep tech world, typically cutting checks around 5 million. We're going to do 20 different companies, 10 in the US and 10 in Europe, with money for follow-on. And what makes us different in our is we think of deep tech and applied deep tech as you've got a big category like deep tech, which could be anything from mining uranium on Mars all the way to something a little less crazy like, believe it or not, there are companies that use ultrasound for payments using micro devices. So a lot of what we do is IoT, sensing, and applied deep tech, so something useful. So I'll get into it a little bit more, but long story short, Jeremy Baksht, Azafran Partners, I'm a director there. We have 2 partners. One, Marty Fisher, was CTO of AOL Technologies, and the other, James Kennefic, grew 3 businesses in a row in telephony and internet to 50 million in revenue and exited. So 2 very entrepreneurial guys that are also great investors. So I report to them and manage our pipeline, half US, half Europe. Thank you.
Saul Richter, founder and managing partner of Rittenhouse Ventures. We are a relatively small venture fund. Our verticals of focus, largest vertical is healthcare. Second largest is analytics, where obviously we see lots of big data and AI. We're generally writing checks of $1 to $3 million into post-revenue early stage companies. We do a lot of recurring revenue SaaS business models. As a smaller fund, we generally don't do kind of deep budget, deep tech, in the sense of, we're a little counter-cyclical in that we believe in relative capital efficiency. And so a lot of the hardware-focused deep tech is beyond us. But within healthcare, within software analytics, we're very excited about AI and big data. Been in VC for 20 years, been involved with about 40 companies over those 20 years. And really an old-fashioned VC firm that writes checks early on and stays involved and works very closely with our portfolios throughout their development. And happy to share with you my thoughts on the AI, big data side of deep tech.
Awesome. And Bryan on the phone? It's not, okay. Move on. Okay, so the second question I had for the panel is sort of, what do you think the most exciting recent breakthrough in DeepTech has been sort of the last year or two? It could be in AI, ML, big data, robotics, etc. And can you just elaborate why you think that's the case and why you think it's so profound?
I can go first, and what's funny, Saul, is I'd love to chat with you after this because it sounds like we play in a lot of the same spaces, and we can definitely collaborate. If you take a step back and think about what applied deep tech means, what our fund is interested in doing is seeing the future, and it's not necessarily Web3 to crypto. Both are very interesting, I find personally, and know those spaces pretty well. But the next layer of voice AI, voice technology, touchless screens, machines talking to each other, that's what we find most interesting. Elon Musk and others might already jump to neural links and other brainwaves where you don't even have to talk. Well, that'll be great in maybe 20 years, but in the meantime, watching my 9-year-old son, paint skins on his Roblox and pay for that stuff, and then yell at Roblox and wonder why it's not responding because everything else responds to him. I think we're in a future where they won't even know how to text, or their handwriting will probably be awful. So that, to me, I think the most enabling thing, it's going to sound incredibly obvious, but it's cloud computing. I think the ability to process data at high speeds enabled all this stuff to happen. So whether it's real-time speech recognition or a token on the toll road, paying for navigation in micro increments for autonomous vehicles, none of that would have ever happened if we couldn't process at real speed. So edge computing, eventually quantum computing, super interesting, but high-speed cloud computing, it's almost I hesitate because it's such an obvious answer, but that enables us to actually do analytics and predictions and exchange of value. Those are all the things that enable it.
Yeah, so I'm going to look through my lens, which, the three largest verticals I focus on are healthcare, HR tech, and then kind of analytics. Not map data, it's healthcare, analytics, and then HR tech. The amount of data in the healthcare space is tremendous, and obviously we struggle with HIPAA and Big Brother and processes and making sure that we treat every patient like they're a patient and not an algorithm. But there's tremendous, the largest industry essentially in the United States is healthcare, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, it's growing at faster than the pace of GDP and consuming larger pieces of our resources. The ability to look at a patient, use algorithms and big data analytics to figure out how they compare to a patient archetype or a patient that we've seen before, and then run some analysis as to what worked for them is really powerful. And we're just seeing the data that's trapped in the EHR, the electronic health record environment, starting to become more freely available. And with that data, we could start to tremendously, really the golden solution in healthcare is to give the right treatment to the right person at the right time. Today, if someone with COPD is having a pulmonary issues, is having a situation where we know in 3 days they're going to be in the emergency room, and they call up their specialist, and the next appointment is 4 days from now, we're creating a tremendous loss of value, tremendous pain for the patient. when, they could have a telehealth visit, 10 minutes later, we could have medication available to them at their home already, which they're then authorized to use. So there are all these very, very simple uses of data that can make big differences in the healthcare space. So I'll throw that out as kind of the area that's my most active investing space. And we're doing that. We have 2 telehealth companies that are all really grabbing larger portions of data and really using that data to optimize care, both for payers and for pharma companies and for device companies from that perspective. So.
I'd love to double click on that. My first angel investment 9 years ago was into a friend's company, ER surgeon. He was one of those people that was like a captain of the Marines, like just a brilliant guy. And you knew he was going to win no matter what he did. I knew nothing about healthcare service at all, really. And he approached me to invest, and I said, absolutely. And he's proved me right. Sirius MD just raised a Series C, about 30 million earlier this year. And what they do is basically a HIPAA compliant text and chat, and it's an ER avoidance solution. So, and one of the interesting aspects of it, as you touched on, was they tried to start with like B2C or B to doctor to C and try to figure it out. And what they ultimately found the most efficacy in was reinsurance and the companies directly. So they are the white label solution for Target. So if you're a Target employee, you have a free benefit to basically talk to a doctor and say, my son isn't breathing, or look at my knee, or do I really need to go to the ER because I'm freaked out right now. But that ER avoidance, that if nothing else, that's their magic thumb screw that they turn to really, create a great business. So telehealth, telemedicine, all the data, reconciliation there. You have a patient file that's 10 years old and if they're a hypochondriac or I have COVID, it's easier for a clinician to actually walk through that data in that HIPAA compliant channel. So love the telemedicine space. And COVID didn't do the world a lot of favors, but it did advance telemedicine even further into, kind of a household thing.
And I'll just add that one of the challenges in this space is there are tech-first solutions, and then there are combined tech and human solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And in healthcare, certain patients are really good with a tech-first solution, and certain patients need a human-first solution. And you can only figure that out after you build, after you interact with them and kind of measure their prior efficacy given different prior treatments. So you can start to build a profile and say, okay, this person is a tech-forward person, and if my app tells them to eat well every day, their diabetes is going to be under control. So that's person A, and then you can clarify and say, this is a person who we've worked with for 3 or 4 years, and they need a human call every 3 days to remind them, how's your insulin, what are you doing? So you can start to build those profiles, and while that's not AI, and it is big data, and it can cost avoidance and the efficiency of treatment from a payer perspective and from a patient perspective can be very aligned and can really be game changing.
Well, one of the things, Saul, that I'm sure you'll appreciate is I want to talk to you later about some of the companies in the Nordics. So our company is half Europe, half US focused. And I was just in Finland last week for the Slush conference, which is like their South by Southwest. And I met some really great companies. But as you can guess, the cultural definitions and mores and values there are quite different. So most Finns by nature are introverted. The last thing that they want to do is have patient treatment through a person, which probably is a little different than some of the US oriented humanity here. But the solution, one of the companies that I like we might invest in, instead of actually talking to a patient, this great team created a brainwave magnetic resonance that basically is like a little skull cap you wear, and it changes the biochemistry in your brain, and it actually moves the magnets in the left and right hemispheres in the right way, and they see tremendous patient efficacy. So in Finland, if you don't want to talk to anybody, and you're willing to wear a little brain cap for half an hour every other day, and it realigns your magnets in your brain. That can be another type of solution. So I just would mention that culturally, it's even interesting just to see the dynamics of Central Europe and the Nordics, how different they are than the US.
Anecdotally, it's also the only country where I think the projection of the founder gives you double it.
That's
They
true.
can be very,
That's true.
rarely
Very
have to see it,
conservative.
right? Rarely have to see it.
Yeah, they're afraid to be wrong, so they'd rather
That's right.
be very conservative, for sure. And also, I mean, the other aspect of Europe that I've appreciated lately is, they all get grants. So at the end of the day, whether it's revenue or equity funding a business, half of these businesses we find until Series A or B are at least funded by the government. So these grants that they get are tremendous. It'd be nice if we did a little bit of that here, but it does seem to work very well over there.
So, given that, what industries do you think has yet to fully take advantage of this new paradigm, this new world we're at? What's lagging, like what sort of broad sectors or industries are lagging?
I know we've talked about this a fair amount. I think particularly in New York, it started with marketing, right? So MarTech, AI, and serving ads, it's a gigantic business, Google, Facebook, notwithstanding. So marketing tech, definitely way out there. FinTech, way out there. Healthcare, which is now, the biggest industry, and painfully so in certain respects, is catching up. It's a little bit of a laggard, and part of that is regulatory. One topic that I like is industrials and ag. Some of those areas really are still a bit untouched. I actually am an advisor to an ag tech company that uses sensors in a greenhouse to optimize temperature, soil, light, and so forth. And it's an amazing breakthrough that could really help these vertical farms take over traditional farming. Because if you can build it better, cheaper, faster, in coordinated conditions all through the year, you're kind of changing the harvest cycle. So I really personally like ag tech, and I see what this one company, Koidra, is doing, and I think that's pretty interesting. And then industrials, of course. I think certain industrial areas have been a little bit untouched. We're looking at a sensors business for a warehouse that basically allows for automation. Because one of the challenges you have with forklifts and warehouse picking is there's always people and stuff in the way. So you don't want to break somebody's foot, and you don't want to run roughshod on anything. So all these dynamic sensors are really interesting. We saw one had a bat, like it uses a signal. So it basically understands where things are using the bat signal. How close am I to something? It's near field temporal positioning sensors. So anyway, long-winded answer, but industrials, ag tech, some of the more kind of traditional machinery areas are pretty interesting to us.
So we already talked about healthcare, so I'll skip that. But I as a bit of a value-focused venture investor, I always focus in the later adopting thing. There is such a thing. I can tell you, happy to tell you more about that. But we are focused on the areas that are the latest adopters, and within the enterprise, we already talked about healthcare as a later adopter, but the other area that's really very rapidly adopting technology now, but probably 10 years behind fintech is HR tech. So think about all the data you have in a company. You have today you're doing engagement surveys, and you're doing reviews, 360 reviews. You're doing hiring. There's LinkedIn posts. There's all this information, and one of our companies is focused on surveys, but not finding out what you're doing well for your employees or what you're not doing well, but looking at the surveys and figuring out where the strengths of your organization are, where the turnover is about to happen in the future, and how do you cut that off. And so if you actually use big data to reverse engineer from survey results, you can kind of build a red, green, yellow map around an organization and find out where the dysfunction in the organization is, where the hiring challenges are going to come, and you can address them preemptively. Think about the costs of hiring someone today. It can be $20,000 to $100,000, if not more, to hire someone. And if you know that that's going to happen, you can preemptively go in there and manage those challenges, find out what the issues are, fix the issues. And so I think that there's a lot of HR, there's a lot of inefficiency in hiring. I earlier on in my ventures and venture capital, I was an investor in video interviewing, which was a very remote concept. What kind of senior person is going to want to take a video interview? Well, now there are algorithms that will sit on top of those video interviews and say, okay, does this person have enough energy to be a salesperson? Are they a good enough presenter? And obviously we have to balance out that the algorithms aren't telling us what to do, but they can obviously shortcut some of the processes dramatically, as opposed to having someone drive an hour, train an hour to sit in a conference room for 3 hours, and then have 6 people meet them. Why don't you just have one person interview and 3 people watch? Some of the basic stuff that we're doing in other areas hasn't been done in HR, and there's a lot of value to be added.
I have a question. There's a great application of AI in tennis. I don't know if you ever go to watch the US Open or other things, but they have something called Shot Swap. And it tells you if the ball is in or out. And now the tennis associations have all gotten rid of linesmen, there's no more controversy, nobody fights anymore, right? It actually calls footballs as well. But one of the interesting things about it is that they can now project when people are playing, if the ball will go in and out, regardless if somebody hits it. So let's say somebody goes to net, they hit a volley and they block the ball from going to the end of the line. They can project that the ball was gonna go in and out based on the velocity calculated, right? It's a really fascinating thing, because the applications in sports are not just, you can do it in soccer, you can do it in basketball, football, et cetera, and say, where was the ball going based on the acceleration, somebody blocked it, what would it have resulted in? And it's really fascinating in terms of, what you can do and what it can project. And I think those are like common day applications of AI and machine learning. And again, it's the whole physics of it, right? It's just a physical thing that's happening, and I can project based on what I know the speed and acceleration and height, et cetera, what's gonna happen. You can do it in soccer. So, are you guys seeing more applications like that are just beyond, so I've always thought that you're talking about video interviewing, that with regards to the fund space, when you interview a fund manager, or not necessarily the most truthful people in the world, or do they reveal data the exact right way, that somebody should have videotape it and then run it through, different variable analyses of the video? Have any of you thought about that, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a product that's out there. There's, established companies like HireVue that claim to have video analytics for video interviewing. So that stuff is, the accuracy can be challenged from that perspective. There's also kind of a, this is a constant battle we're gonna have going forward, as you have the in theory, if I work for a company and they legally have the right to read all my email, they can probably figure out who is likely to break the HR rules, right? So you could have a bot that reads every email and says, okay, this person's saying inappropriate things, let's set off a tag. So there's that big brother effect, which is very efficient, but very scary to employees, especially, younger employees who are,
So my only other comment, industrial psychology is incredibly accurate in this day and age, right? I mean, I know an industrial psychologist, they can give you a questionnaire and pinpoint your personality in seconds, right? Computerizing that is, they could do it to your emails, as you said, so.
It's a very interesting thing. One of the things we spend a lot of time focused on, now we're going sub-vertical, so if I'm getting too far into the rabbit hole, the pre-interview analyses. So you're hiring someone and you want them to do a survey and you ask them 50 questions and then you give them a score. Are they aggressive? And there are all these things. In general, over time, Europeans and international folks have been much more eager to adopt it than Americans. It's spilled over into the American world because it feels a little invasive. Here I am projecting out, and so it'll be interesting to see over time what the adoption, because these algorithms are really good. You take a salesperson, you ask them 50 questions. If you kind of back test, you can figure out, okay, this is the profile of someone that we should have. Here are the 6 people that were successful. We had given them that test. We can then say, okay, let's put that person. But now you're starting to have the algorithms tell you what to do, and Americans are very hesitant in that spot. And so there's an interesting differential in the HR space and the automated survey, AI, big data space in HR, in talent evaluation, that really struggles with that. There's a local company in New York that actually built an algorithm. One of my earlier founders, his second company, they built an algorithm to do exactly what we're talking about. They went and they tried selling it to all the companies. No one would buy it. And what he did is created an HR company that used the algorithm, and now he's got a very, very successful HR business where he can easily do a hiring because he's overlaid that onto a resume database and a testing process, and he can get success rates that are 2 or 3 times what your average recruiter is. So he's basically a tech-enabled recruiter. But he couldn't sell the technology 5 years ago, and now he's using it very successfully himself, just because of that adoption. So I think there's an adoption curve. There's a different comfort level we have with algorithms telling us what doctor to go to, algorithms telling who we should hire. And so that's gonna play out over time with different comfort levels, different age generations. 10 years ago, we were talking about the different levels of privacy comfort level with different generations, right? Why would I ever post a transaction? I just bought something at a store. Well, different generations have different comfort levels with all of this. So every year, everyone gets a little younger or more tech savvy. And so it'll be interesting to see how this determinism, this algorithm determinism plays out in the long run from that.
One interesting anecdote is I was speaking last week to a very interesting entrepreneur named Christian Angermeyer, who started Tide Life Sciences. He's not done on crypto, and he's a very interesting guy here at Google. But he was saying that how Tide is sort of a publicly traded now, $2 billion, sort of a holding company for CNS-related disorders like using psilocybin for depression and other sort of indications. And there are a bunch of shots on goals. He was saying that they developed initially it was therapeutics focused, but then they developed such an app to essentially complement their therapeutics, essentially, and ensure patient compliance and so on and so forth. And they noticed that a lot of these apps are essentially white label apps for using text messages for interface between the patient and the provider. And the app was able to determine if a patient is slowly getting into depression based on the nature of the text. So something that was a secondary, almost an accidental discovery has now become almost a primary application for this. So it's marrying drug development discovery with AI and ML, right? With respect, it's a very simple use case, I guess. So it's quite fascinating to hear.
I agree. Christian's an interesting guy. I think he's like a billionaire now. I saw him a couple months ago. My question for the panelists: you guys are playing in larger deals now, it sounds like, and can you give any commentary about buying from sort of VC-backed companies? Because maybe in the past it hasn't been as much from individuals, whether family offices or high net worth individuals, but it sounds like, have you had that experience, or do you have any guidance as to buying from sort of sponsored type of transactions on a transaction basis?
So I'm the anomaly here. I'm a capital efficiency focused, value focused VC in an era when most people aren't thinking of that. So
He's a unicorn.
every
He's the one.
the trends out there are raise more capital earlier on. And for many entrepreneurs, it's just not the right thing to do. And so we really try to raise the right amount of capital at the right time for every company. We have a company that has raised $2 million and sold it for 10x 3 years in, and the founders own 80% of the company, and the valuation we did it at didn't matter. So there are a lot of post-revenue companies that go out there and they say they want to raise 10, 20, or 30. When you ask them how much they need for the next 18 months, they say 3 to 5. And so we really focused on those entrepreneurs. It's 30%. And so when I walk into a meeting, 80% of people tell me I'm crazy. Why should I raise 3 when I can raise 30? And I'm like, okay, well, call me in 10 years and we'll talk about this. But 20% of the entrepreneurs are like, oh my God, I haven't seen any VCs who told me to raise less money. And it doesn't mean you should walk into a gunfight with a paperclip, but there are a lot of, the software industry is the best industry in the world, and that the next set of software that you put up on the cloud costs you 1 to 2 pennies of the dollar you're going to get for it. And you can build very capital efficient companies. And what we found in my history is that in the 28 investments I've made out of my funds, we've had 3 unicorns not trying to have unicorns, okay? And that's really, and we've had a lot of great exits in smaller. So we're a contrarian, and for a small portion of entrepreneurs who know that the less capital they raise, the more exit potential they have at every stage, that's the thing. So we don't participate in club deals, big deals, bank deals, where we're raising 20 or 30 or 40 million dollars. But we also try to raise the right amount of money. So.
By the less capital you raise, are they commensurately lower value, or are you taking a lower chunk of the company?
In exchange, well, in today's environment, there's a lot of venture debt available. So, someone comes to me, they say, I need $10 million and I want to do it at a $30 million valuation. I'm like, great. how much do you need for the next 18 months? And is your valuation gonna be a lot higher in 18 months? Yes. Well, let's raise 4 million of capital, let's do 2 million of venture capital, 2 million of venture debt. And then will that last you 18 months? And then in 18 months, you have a bigger option, which is to say, let me sell the company, because now I've grown it to be break even, and it's very valuable, 10 million SaaS plus. And that's really where we focus from that perspective. So yes, we're trying to get into a lower valuation. We're often leveraging it because on the downside, all of the equity is debt on the downside anyway. So adding debt into an early stage company doesn't really raise your debt profile, your risk profile much. So that's our angle. It's a very rare angle. It's very investor, entrepreneur, family office friendly.
It's funny, Saul, we actually, I commiserate with you 100% on this. The way we look at deals is we think about team timing and traction. We like teams that are, 5, 10, 15 people, probably have already been an entrepreneur in the past, have some proven success and track record. They're not looking at the shiny lights of raising too much money and having a down round. So I think the team is important to us. Traction will never come in quite as early as Saul. We're not as heroic, but $1 million or $2 million in ARR typically tells us, okay, somebody likes this product. They're probably going to have some stickiness, especially if they haven't had a lot of turnover. So the traction is important. And then timing. This is a DeepTech panel. We don't want to be so early that it's a moonshot and it's mining on Mars or whatever. We need to get a little closer to the goal. So we actually do resonate a lot with the value side. And what I would tell you is most of the companies that we see that we like are really something with an enabling R&D with patents. So in a way, we like that CEO, CTO founding team that has something really cute. They're not necessarily trying to raise 50 million for a brand, they're trying to build something useful. And maybe I'm colored by my background in M&A, but I'd much rather find a company with 2 million revenue that we can take to 10 or 20 in 3 to 5 years, and then call up ABB, Siemens, Medtronic. I mean, the multiples they're paying are 20x revenue for something that they can throw into their distribution channel. So why should I company pre-buy a sales and marketing team when I can make sure that they have a great, 5 pilots and then a few really great channel partners and then go straight into a corporate and get that corporate distribution? Why am I going to pre-buy that? That works if you're creating a new category. Uber, Didi, and Lyft can all fight over coupons and discounts and promotions. We love our clients, our portfolio companies, to raise prices. Once you're in and you're good, whether it's a data infrastructure or whatever, we want them, we want their end clients to say, this is a problem. You're going to unplug us, this is a problem. Okay, you can 3X me and I hate you, but I'm not unplugging your solution. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I agree, we're value conscious, and we don't want to be investing in any company that's using our money for marketing. 1 or 2 or 3 great salespeople on a beachhead in each country or wherever they're trying to get into, that's enough. We don't want LinkedIn ads or any of that stuff. Some firms do. I mean, if you have an LTV to CAC ratio that's 2 or 3 or more, perfect. I'm going to give you $1. You're going to go spend 40 cents on Google and you're going to make new clients. Perfect. I'll do that all day long. That's not our strategy. And I guess that's why this is a deep tech panel. We care about the founders and they have to build really great enabling tech. And that's it. Let us help them prove that it works. And then there's a lot of corporate acquirers that would love to have it. You look at a lot of these SPACs that go out there in our space. I won't name names, but there's a security perimeter company that went public, $2 billion valuation on $5 million in revenue. And I'm looking at it and I can't figure it out. 20 times 2025 revenue, that's the multiple. It's you're pricing that thing for perfection and you're probably going to fail. So anyway, I know this isn't a SPAC conference by any stretch, but seeing people put multiples on things that are 4 years out, that's just insane to me. I'd much rather be near term. How much do you need the next 18 months?
Yeah,
Do you need 5 strategic hires or 10? Let's get you those people and then get you on the path, and then we'll worry about raising 100 million in 3 years later.
Do you worry about speed? What about the Peter Teal approach, which is that if I gave you infinite money today, how quickly can you have it done?
My short answer is no, because, this isn't my phrase, but 9 women can't make a baby in a month. That really resonates for me. Sometimes if you have a brilliant CTO, you can wrap around 2, 3, 4, 5 people to help them, but you don't necessarily need 20 or 30 or 40 people pounding on the same project. Sometimes a 10x person can really be the difference maker. So I don't know if that's true. Yeah.
From our philosophy, we would rather invest in an area that's smaller and nichier, where we're not having the challenge with technology today is that you're right, anyone in $5 million or $25 million or $125 million can build something. And what that does is it commoditizes things very rapidly. I would rather have a less interesting space where I can be the dominant player pretty quickly and then elbow everyone else out and get sold to a company that's adjacent to me.
Yeah.
Then
Riches and missions.
exactly. So that's really an area we're focused, as opposed to everyone wakes up in the morning and says, I want to create the next Uber for something. And there's 20 companies doing that, and the one who wins might be the company that raised the most money, but it's not going to be a company. I'm not going to be the 31st person trying to be that company.
About 5 minutes.
Just quickly, jumping around, Jeremy, probably more for Jeremy than you, Bryan, but comment on DeepTech as applied to crypto, broadly blockchain, and the sort of related question everyone talks about is quantum computing and near-term threat for this stuff, and I think it's not, it's probably 20 years away, but what your perspective on quantum as it relates to cryptocurrency?
So I asked this question of a lot of people, and quantum at speed could break the algorithms and the cryptography for certain coins, and I think Bitcoin was a wonderful first start at all of this, but having said that, being first doesn't necessarily give you the 100-year gravitas. If you look at the public companies every year and how that's rotated, right? I mean, we have a completely new set of horses, and a friend of mine is starting a 100-coin fund that's investable, and she's like, look, even if you map on every month what happens in the top 25 coins, they all jostle around a fair amount. So I think the enabling, there's 3 different categories, right? You got DeFi, you've got blockchain alternatives like Polkadot versus Ethereum or Bitcoin. Which one of these are going to win? It's super, super hard to say. And anytime you ask a zealot or a religious Bitcoin fan, and I've traded it before and I've done very well with it, but I don't really get a clear answer. Quantum can really break encryption. Oh, well, we have our smartest people working on it. Okay, sure. Well, how much money have they made? Greg Wright yesterday got his rights back to 54 billion in Bitcoin. Whether or not he actually is Satoshi or not, I don't know. But assuming he is not, is he really remunerated to come up with the next Bitcoin? So I'd say whales defending their positions is probably where we are. I mean, Michael Saylor is super interesting to me.
Yeah.
He's turned MicroStrategy into a Bitcoin ETF. I mean, that's basically what he's doing.
So I'll just throw out one kind of counter answer to that, which is that the fundamental concept of blockchain and distributed financial infrastructure is going to change everything. And where I can look at that as a smaller fund focused on niche areas is to solve really old basic problems, like the fact that when you go for healthcare treatment, no one asks you anything about how much it's going to cost. No one actually has you prepay, and then 6 weeks later, after they've already treated you, you get a bill in the mail, and then it's collection agents within 3 weeks, and you can't actually. So there are more basic fundamental problems that are a very large part of the economy. The whole medical collection space is this huge industry that eventually, when we use the core infrastructure of blockchain, we can have a lot of that on the payment
I
side.
think the counterpunch of that, though, would be, I was with Triple Blind for dinner this week. Triple Blind is backed by Mayo. They've raised about 40 million. I'm an advisor there. And it's deep federated learning, and it's better than homomorphic encryption. And it's basically called blind or federated learning, where you're pulling from a bunch of different databases, and you're passing the actual data in tokens, but there's no token to buy. So I hate to say the banker hole separate the Bitcoin from the blockchain or whatever, but you don't necessarily need to pass tokens in order to do federated learning. So I find blockchain very interesting. I see Nisa in the back there. I find blockchain super interesting, but sometimes it's a slow database. Do you really need a token on a really slow database? I do love it for creator economy and some of the new areas of paying people. Like, why don't I get paid for my tweets? I probably should. My tweets are awesome, I think. But that hasn't really fully happened to Google. So I'd say it's a tool much like any tool. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not.
So 2 quick questions, just kind of for short time. One is, anyone can comment on space? We've talked about space tech, how DeepTech applies, and then we'll pick that up.
I'm going to throw it that way because I don't know that much about space.
Okay. So,
I'll take a pass as well, but
next question is, how does DeepTech either improve or make worse societal inequity? And Marty mentioned that the linesman being replaced by AI, right? So how does DeepTech work into either making it more equitable or increasing the disparity, I guess? How do you see that?
I mean, to me, it's like a training tool. In the past, you have to go to an Ivy League to be able to be educated a certain way. Now it's more of a social network in a respect. So I think the enabling speed of data and analytics kind of levels the playing field to some extent. Now, having said that, you have a lot of people who have gotten super, super rich on things that aren't necessarily societally interesting. Like, I like Bored Apes. I think they're cool. I don't know why I would buy one for $1 million, but I had friends mining those a few months ago for fun that now have made millions and millions of dollars on just being ahead of the curve on something. So I'd almost say the speed to riches now, irrespective of deep tech or not, is incredible. I mean, if you look at China is governed by the state, Europe's sort of state and family. The US is still a bastion of individualism, so if you give a monkey a tool and enough time, they're gonna come up with something. So I've never been more excited about entrepreneurship, and I believe in having a growth mindset here. I think it's just about speed. So, some smaller countries like the Nordics are really good at distributed social democracy, and maybe that's because they're small and homogenous and they got a hell of a head start. We're maybe like an accidental superpower in a way because we have incredible natural resources and oceans and other things, but at some point the metaverse flattens that out. So I guess my short answer is everything's going to be flattened out because access to data and access to information and starting companies has never been easier.
So I think that all technology can be used for good and can be used for less good. When we first brought up the concept of video interviewing 10 years ago, everyone said, well, then it's gonna bring up these huge biases where we're gonna know, what someone's nationality is when we see them, and this is a great way. The opposite ended up happening, and people are like, wait, if I can touch more people, I can bring more of a diverse group of people. And so one of our portfolio companies has a very large employee database, and the biggest use they've found in the last 18 months is bringing more diverse candidates into job searches. And so, there's technology and data can be mined, and it just has to be pointed in a direction that's beneficial to society. And again, that comfort with individualism and that we have when we were talking about the bifurcation of Europe and America is very different. But there are a lot of great uses for technology, and there are a lot of challenging ones, as we see in social media, where everyone can live in their own bubble and create a big echo chamber. So I think it's really about, it's going to be the next 10, 20 years is going to be very challenging of finding the benefits of technology versus the challenges.
Great job. Thanks so much, guys.